Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to the classic Passage to India, section number 1 of 9 sections of this poem. Now our assumptions are that you've been with us at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist. Everything from the first introductory word come, which we're going to play around with obviously in this poem as well, all the way up through our inscriptions. For example, we're going to make references to eidolons in this first passage. We've given a set of introductory comments as well to Passage to India that I hope that you are familiar with as well. Now, as we turn to the opening section, we just want to remind ourselves that the word passage was already, for us, an important word in our study of crossing Brooklyn Ferry number 2. You'll remember the passage over the river. And 15 times in this poem, the word passage is going to get used, as we were commenting in our prior introductory lecture. India is rarely mentioned in Leaves of Grass, but you'll remember it in Salute Aman, number 6, as well as Song of the Redwood, number 2. And every time that it's mentioned, it's always going to be kind of esoteric and the like. And we'll obviously talk about maybe why that is. Let's notice right away the repetition in the anaphoria of the word singing happening 3 times in a row in the first 3 lines. The energy of this poem has much to do with the idea, as we talked about in Proud Music of the Storm, that Whitman loves his music and he loves singing, he loves the effect of choral voices. Passage 1. Singing my days, singing the great achievements of the present, singing the strong light works of engineers, our modern wonders, the antique ponderous 7 outweighed. In the old world, the East, the Suez Canal, the new by its mighty railroads spanned, the seas inlaid with eloquent, gentle wires, yet first to sound and ever sound, the cry with thee, O soul, the past, the past, the past, the past, the dark unfathomed retrospect, the teeming gulf, the sleepers and the shadows, the past, the infinite greatness of the past. For what is the present, after all, but a growth out of the past? As a projectile formed, impelled, passing a certain line, still keeps on, so the present, utterly formed, impelled by the past. Now this repetition of 8 times with the word past, we will want to pay attention to, as well as the 6 exclamation points, as an attempt to try and build some energy as we start. Notice this singing my days will take us right back to those inscription poems, and especially I hear America singing the varied carols I hear. Notice the singing my days. This phrase, my days, you'll remember from the Wound Dresser 2, you ask of my days. And it's interesting because in some ways, and we're going to say this over and over again as we finish Leaves of Grass, Whitman has spent so much of his life through Leaves of Grass trying to understand, comprehend my days, and then trying to translate it to us. What's it like to live during Whitman's time, at that pre-1900 days? And how is that so different from today? Obviously similar as well. He'll call it the past, right? Singing the great achievements of the present, and obviously when we talk about Whitman, we're always talking about his celebration of the great achievements. Singing the strong light works of engineers. By the way, I want you to pay attention to all of the adjectives in Passage to India and the way in which he uses it. Notice it's not just strong, but it's light. Movement. Everything is about progress, in other words. Notice the word engineers. We've seen this already with Song of the Broad Axe 3. His celebration of technology and engineering is central. Our, and then he uses the modern word, our modern wonders. Now, you'll remember that the very first set of lines that we read when we started this little project of Talks with Walt was oneself I sing. Do you remember this? Oneself I sing, a simple separate person, yet utter the word democratic, the word en masse, of physiology, from top to toe I sing, not physiognomy alone, nor brain alone is worthy for the muse I say, the form complete is worthier far, the female equally with the male I sing, of life immense, impassioned, pulse and power, cheerful, for freest action formed under the laws divine, and then the last line, the modern man I sing. Now his use of the word modern was the setup to prepare us for it being used right here, right now. Notice our modern wonders. Notice he goes from my days to our wonders, our modern wonders. And then he'll say it in parenthetics, the antique ponderous seven outweighed. Now our Nortons will tell us that he's referencing the seven wonders of the world of ancient times. They were the Egyptian pyramids, the mausoleum, the temple at Ephesus, the hanging gardens of Babylon, the Colossus of Rhodes, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, and of course the lighthouse at Alexandria. And now he's going to mention the new wonders. He's going to talk about the Suez Canal that obviously joins the Mediterranean and the Red Seas, begun in April of 1859, opened November 17th of 1869. The railroad, of course, he's talking about is the Union Pacific, the Central Pacific Railroads, joined at Promontory, Utah, obviously, May the 10th, 1869. And the wires that he's talking about are the laying of the Atlantic cable successfully completed in 1866. So the way he says it is, our modern wonders, the antique ponderous seven outweighed. By the way, the word outweighed only gets used one time in all these of grass, and it's right here. In the old world, notice capitalized. In the old world, the east, the Suez Canal. The new, notice capitalized, by its mighty railroads spanned. The seas inlaid with eloquent, again, notice your adjectives, gentle wires in the way he stacks those adjectives. Now it's, before it was strong and light, now it's elegant and gentle wires. Yet, first to sound and ever sound, notice the repetition of the word sound back to singing, the cry with thee, O soul. Now this phraseology of O soul, we've seen it a number of times. I'll just take you back to a song of joys, joys worthy of thee, O soul. When he's talking to himself, and of course he'll say it later in this poem, that what he means is the real me, the soul. And then, now the repetition, the past, the past, the past, and then he'll say it again as he begins his next stanza, the past. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, I think Whitman is trying to, first of all, go back to the past, that is to say India, the cradle of spiritual civilization, some scholars have called it. And yet he's also going to be talking about the modern, that is to say going forward. And what is he doing? Well, he's doing what we said in our lectures on Milton and Shakespeare, and we'll obviously say it as well about the great Emily Dickinson, that the greatest artists, poets, writers are those who somehow subsume everything of the past and then qualify everything going forward, or somehow influence everything going forward. And yet there's so much about the present, as we've said about the great Dante, the way in which he is the most individual and yet universal of poets, and we've given full lectures on Dante at learnstrong.net. Notice here it's also exclamation points, 6 of them, to finish this section. The past, the past, the past. And then it's almost as if he's now going to muse on the past with that dash, which does make us think of our Emily Dickinson. Notice the dark, again back to our study of adjectives, dark, unfathomed retrospect. Now we've commented on the fact that Whitman is the first great integralist poet. That is to say, he's always thinking about the idea evolutionarily of transcending and including. Notice, it's always going to be this process somehow translinguistic, unfathomed retrospect. Although he has spent so much time trying to help us understand the past. Think of drum taps, for example. The teeming gulf, the use of the word teeming obviously makes us think about his use of this word, as well as, of course, something like the Statue of Liberty. The teeming gulf, again the dash. The sleepers and the shadows. We're going to see the poem Sleepers here in a little bit. So it's almost like a trailer for the upcoming attraction. And then the shadows, which obviously is going to play into the sleepers as well. But the shadows makes us immediately think of Republic 7. Now, Whitman's audience would have gotten that quickly because, of course, Plato's Republic is probably a little better known to his audience, the idea that individuals are sitting chained in a cave and they can only see shadows on a wall and assume them to be real. We've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net if you'd like to run that one to ground. And then he does it one more time. Notice the repetition of the dashes. The past, again the dash. The infinite greatness of the past. So in other words, it's not that he's going to completely leave the past in his passage to India and even beyond India, more than India, but there's a respect that he's going to give to it, but it's an intentional respect. That is to say, creeds and schools and abeyance. We're back to the opening lines of Song of Myself 1, right? 4, and then he'll ask it to the reader, and we're so familiar with this now, obviously. For what is the present after all? And of course that construction of after all he's used before. I think that's a very American usage. For what is the present after all but a growth out of the past? Can I just pause for a moment and point out what I've said so many times? I think Whitman is having a great time in these poems and in these sections of poems. notice we call this collection Leaves of Grass. And so here he points out that history itself, obviously he's learned some of this from his study of Hegel, history is this growth out of the past, transcending and including, again, is the integral language of Ken Wilber, who has influenced us in 303 to think in these ways. And then in Parenthetics, that we'll see now, for the second time, right? In Parenthetics, as a projectile form, but this is going to be this constructed of as so, right? We're so familiar with it. As a projectile formed, it's fascinating that he uses the word projectile. We think of drum taps immediately. That which is being forced to go forward. As a projectile formed, impelled, this word impelled will get used again here in a second, comes from Eidolons for the first time, passing, think of passage to India, passing a certain line, now he's going to speak almost in the language of sailing, still keeps on, and again, his use of the word still, I think T.S. Eliot learned how to use the word still from his study of poems like this, still keeps on, so the present, utterly formed, impelled by the past. Well, what's he doing here to just finish section 1? Well, I think he's reminding us that he is going to celebrate the future, but we must never forget that the new is the new. That is to say, the N-E-W is the K-N-E-W. That all growth is a process of transcending and including, but we mustn't ever completely forget what it is that we're transcending. It's just we're moving on. Of course, the greatest ideas always seem to kind of find their way reinvented, and we're going to play that game in spades in Passage to India. At 2b, the repetition, the past being used 8 times. This is going to be a poem about the future. And notice he'll begin with the present, but it's always about the past, the past, the past. And again, studying the adjectives of this poem, I think, is very useful. At 3a, and this will seem at first maybe a strange connection, because obviously there's whole bunches of echoes that we could make. I mean, we read the very first poem of When Self I Sing, the idea that these echoes are all the way. They're ubiquitous in Leaves of Grass. But I want to throw out Mary Shelley's classic Frankenstein that so many people assume is the title of that novel. Of course, we've given full lectures on this at learnstrong.net. That is not the name of the novel. The name of the novel is Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. And the idea of modernity, and you'll remember that that one was published the first day in January of 1818. I think that's significant because I think so much of what Whitman is going to say in Passage to India is informed by his reading and study of Shelley's Frankenstein. Finally, at 3b, what about you? Do you still believe that our world is modern? Is it postmodern? Is it post-postmodern? When, as we've said already, when Whitman uses the word modern, he's usually referencing technology. That's what he's talking about, and technological advances. How about this for a question that you can maybe help you to own this passage? What most have you grown out of, beyond, transcended, and included, and yet somehow it's a part of you? To what degree do you think that we as a culture or as a nation have as well grown out of? Well, as we turn now to section 2 and beyond, we'll have a sense of this idea of dynamic growth. I hope. Passage. Thank you.